efforts have failed the Syrian people for far too long. We know that. After 5 years of war, the people of Syria don't want words, they want action, and they deeply want to be able to live in peace. Now, we, of course, took every effort over the course of the last hours, many hours, focusing on how to try to make this real. And we believe the best way to make it real is to go about a quiet business, which is the prerequisite of being able to implement the things that we think should be implemented. Now, as Sergei related to you, we had a very, very full agenda. We discussed almost every other issue of concern, from bilateral relationship to Ukraine, implementation of Minsk, Yemen, Middle East peace, as Sergei described, Libya, and so forth. And we talked specifically further about Nagorno-Karabakh, where we have both been involved as members of the Minsk, as co-chairs of Minsk, together with our French counterpart, Jean-Marc Ayrault. We are working on that issue, and I appreciate President Putin's leadership, and I appreciate Sergei's initiative in visiting the capitals and working with the presidents. I had the privilege of meeting with both presidents in Warsaw just the other day, and we are deeply encouraging, all of us, of an effort to move away from war and move towards the potential of peace for a long, long frozen conflict. Just last month, President Putin met with the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia in St. Petersburg. And when I saw them in Warsaw, they were grateful for that, and they talked further about ways we might try to go forward. It is clearly in everyone's interest to avoid a new outbreak of fighting, and I am confident that with Russian, American, and French support, the potential for progress is there. Foreign Minister Lavrov and I will continue to consult on this issue and will remain in regular contact with both presidents in order to try to encourage a peaceful and a permanent solution. In closing, I just want to remind everyone that yesterday marked 1 year since the United States, Russia, China, and our partners in Europe finalized an agreement that blocks Iran's potential pathways to building a nuclear weapon. And that was an agreement that we can proudly say has made the world a safer place. Reaching that agreement required cooperation, coordination, and a consistent commitment by both of our nations, Russia, the United States, and the others, to diplomacy, to non-proliferation, and to a future that is less dangerous and more secure and more peaceful. It is absolutely in that spirit that we have come together in Moscow today. And it is in that spirit that we strive to replicate our efforts in confronting the crises in Syria, Ukraine, Nagorno-Karabakh, and elsewhere. And so with that, again, I thank my host, Sergei Lavrov, and we'd be happy to take a question or questions. I'm not sure how it's working.
Уважаемые коллеги, мы переходим к вопросу. Будет по одному вопросу от российских и американских журналистов.
First question tonight from Gardner Harris, New York Times.
Secretary Kerry, first, can you give us an update on the situation in Turkey at the moment? I'm sorry to ask something so off topic, but it's certainly of interest. Second, critics say this deal is a huge boon to the Assad regime by concentrating American firepower against the most effective anti-Assad forces, and that you're basically selling out the rebels. Can you respond to that criticism, and what happens to this deal if, like every other one, the Syrian and Russian forces violate its terms? Mr. Lavrov, are you doing anything concrete to plan for or encourage a post-Assad future, and if so, what? And independent news organizations have reported that Russian forces have repeatedly violated previous ceasefire agreements in Syria. Are those reports accurate?
With respect to Turkey, I only, because we have been engaged very deeply in discussions all day, and literally Sergei and I caught up to the news of what may or may not be happening at the very last minute before coming in here. So I think it's inappropriate for me to comment except to say that we've heard the reports that others have heard. I don't have any details at this point in time. I hope there will be stability and peace and continuity within Turkey, but I have nothing to add with respect to what has transpired at this moment. With respect to the critics who may or may not be making judgments about what may or may not have been agreed upon, first of all, they don't know the details of what we have or haven't agreed on, and number two, we have homework to do, and I said that very clearly. Number three, the United Nations Security Council has labeled both Daesh, or ISIL as some call it, and al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda. They are labeled as terrorist organizations. And the United States has no clouds over our eye, there's nothing standing in the way of our judgment about the need to be standing up against and fighting against terrorism. And both are terrorists. So if some critic is criticizing the United States or Russia for going after al-Nusra, which is a terrorist organization, because they're good fighters against Assad, they have their priorities completely screwed up. The fact is that Nusra is plotting against countries in the world. What happened in Nice last night could just as well have come from Nusra or wherever it came from as any other entity, because that's what they do. And so I have no illusions about what we need to do. I also have confidence in the people of Syria and confidence in the opposition, the non-terrorist organization, opposition, the legitimate opposition, the opposition we have supported, to continue to fight for their freedom and for their principles and their values within Syria. And there is nothing that we are doing that is going to undermine the particular fundamentals between them and the Assad regime. We have always said, and nothing that we're talking about doing here will change the fact that there is no military solution to the problem of Syria. It requires a diplomatic, political solution. And that political solution requires going to the table and having a negotiation in Geneva according to the terms of the Geneva Accord. Now, as I said a moment ago, there are two principal violators that have been persistently violating what is going on with respect to the ceasefire. And one is, as I said, the Assad regime with its indiscriminate bombing, and the second is obviously the question of al-Nusra, which, as you just said, is fighting against Assad, and which is providing no peace and security, and which, regrettably, some opposition have occasionally chosen to fight with because they are fighting against Assad. But that doesn't excuse it, and it will not excuse it in our eyes. We saw what happened when people said the same thing about ISIL for a period of time. Oh, don't worry, they're just a force against Assad, and down the road we can take them on. Well, they became more than just a force. And so I think that it is important for the United States, Russia, the entire coalition of ISSG to stand up against terrorism, and that is what we intend to continue to do. Now, we continue, not one iota of our policy has changed with respect to the Assad regime. We still believe that Syria can't have peace while Assad is there. We believe that. We have a difference with Russia on that. But notwithstanding that difference, we both believe it is important for us to try to reestablish the cessation of hostilities. And when we first came to the table in Vienna, and I proposed a ceasefire and put it on the table, it was not Russia or Iran that said no. Both of them said, yes, we should have a ceasefire. But there are others at the table who opposed proceeding forward with a ceasefire, and some of them, unfortunately, I think, may regret that today, but the point is simply that we have consistently been working towards the full implementation of a ceasefire. Now, final comment. It gets very confusing, obviously, on the ground with respect to who's who and who's where, and that's part of the homework we're going to do in order to absolutely be able to be clearer to people about who is supported by whom and who needs to change their behavior in order to adhere to the ceasefire itself. And we had a long conversation about that today. I'm not going to share all the details of it because it won't work unless certain things, conditions which we agree have to be met, are put in place. So we're not here promising the world. Not here tonight to suggest to you that overnight this is going to change. But I am here with confidence that if the things we talked about and agreed ought to be implemented are in fact implemented, then this has the opportunity to change the playing field significantly. And let the proof be in the pudding, not in our words.
Что